Morning. Good evening, morning. All right, shall I just start with a really quick reflection? Look, this morning was an opportunity to meet with senators and representatives from across both parties in the capital. Common themes in all of those discussions, a real interest in trade issues and the role that the United States can play on increasing our engagement and their engagement in the region on trade, including an interest, obviously, in the role that the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework can play. Gun law reform was discussed. There was an interest in hearing about New Zealand's experience and a chance for us to hear the perspectives of legislators here and in the environment following two recent horrific and absolutely tragic events. We also discussed regional issues, the role of China in our region, the United States' engagement with China, the war in Ukraine, and issues around cyber and digital, including the opportunities that exist between us, emerging technologies and the challenges they bring, and the role of the Christchurch call to action. So, a range of issues, but common amongst almost every discussion.
Any word yet on a meeting with Biden? Was that discussed today or decided on?
As you'll be aware, any confirmation around such meetings need to be coordinated. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the US system right now, but I'll hope that we'll be able to update you shortly.
You say to be coordinated. That sounds like it's a yes, you're just waiting for a time.
I stick by what I just said. When we have something to update you on, we will.
And does America need...
Here and then here, we'll work sequentially. Go ahead.
So Mitt Romney has accepted $20 million worth of funding or payments from the National Rifle Association. What common ground do you have with someone like that?
Oh, look, New Zealand has had an experience in March 15, a horrific terrorist attack. Here in the United States, we have seen the evidence of mass shootings and the impact that has had. Now, today, I was not here to do anything more than share the experience that New Zealand has had, our own reform and the role it's played, and we hope providing greater protection going forward. Do we have more work to do? Yes, we do. But I was more than happy to answer the questions that different representatives had on our experience.
Does America need to reform its gun laws?
Look, I'm always cautious. It's not for me as the leader of a nation with different histories and experiences to tell other nations what they should or should not do. All I can do is simply reflect that New Zealand had its own horrific experience and that we made changes as a result. And that we are a nation that has very legitimate use of guns within our society, pest control, hunting and so on, and yet still we were able, with almost unanimous wide support, to make those changes.
China is expanding or looking to make some agreements around defence, intelligence and security in the Pacific. What is your response to that in terms of, again, the relationship and the context of the Pacific?
Look, given you can see here that this is a discussion that draws in, or at least China is seeking to draw in, a wide membership of the Pacific. And so from New Zealand's perspective, we see it as incredibly important that the response to it and those discussions actually come from within the Pacific as well. That Pacific Island Forum leaders meeting, which unfortunately for a range of reasons has had to be pushed out by a few months, will be incredibly important as an opportunity for the Pacific to canvass its view on that increasing presence and the actions of China to increase its role in the Pacific. New Zealand has its view, obviously on anything relating to security arrangements. We're very strongly of the view that we have within the Pacific the means and ability to respond to any security challenges that exist, and New Zealand is willing to do that.
Is it coming in direct conflict or challenge to Five Eyes, for example? Does this bring Five Eyes more directly into the region?
Look, I wouldn't necessarily see it as a direct response to that necessarily. I see it as China's trying to increase its engagement with sovereign nations, but expanding into a space where actually the need around security arrangements, we are able to meet within our region. It's not for us to speak on behalf of other Pacific Island nations, but what I can say is that where that need exists, New Zealand stands ready to respond to it. The Pacific is our home. we consider the Pacific our family. And so where those needs exist, we are ready and willing to respond to that call.
The message from the US Chamber of Commerce yesterday was that they want in with the CPTPP.
Yeah.
The conversations you had today with senators, congressmen, what is the message from them? Is it still not politically palatable?
No, so I shared a very clear view from New Zealand's perspective that the CPTPP, what was then the TPP when the United States was at the table, remains, in our view, the gold standard. If the United States is looking to engage in our region economically, then that is the place to do it. And actually varying perspectives on that issue, there does still remain some support amongst those I spoke to around that being ultimately the best place to engage. One of the things, though, that we really wanted to impart is that if we want greater resilience in our region, we need, across the region, not just for New Zealand, greater trading partners and opportunities. That's where you build the strength, where you don't have just singular reliance on one trading partner. That's what New Zealand's been striving for with our free trade agreements with the UK and the EU, and that's what our region as a whole needs.
Do you think that the Indo-Pacific framework could ever get to that point in terms of trade, or is it really a case of getting them on board with CPTPP?
Look, it is a starting point for a discussion, and even within the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, there is an opportunity to discuss digital issues, climate issues, and reducing friction. I mean, great example, the infant formula issue here in the United States is not an issue necessarily around those traditional trade barriers, but actually non-tariff trade barriers, the regulation that has to be gotten through via the FDA to allow New Zealand-based products into the country. There is an opportunity through the IPEF to talk about those non-traditional trade blockages. So that is an opportunity, an opening for us. We will take that, but we will keep advocating for market access
Isn't it
too.
a cop-out for the US to offer this economic framework that doesn't offer anything in terms of market access or tariff reductions?
Look, I think we're at this early stage, I think it's too soon to be quite that disparaging or dismissive. We are, after all, the ones who called for the United States to engage in our region economically, and we've seen a response to that. We're there in good faith. It's better to be at the table shaping those discussions than not, but we will keep pushing at every step for market access.
Will you be in the region?
Yeah, and then I'll just pan back around.
Yeah.
Yep.
Why is doing a tour of the Pacific Islands before our own Foreign Affairs Minister?
Oh, well, look, you seem to be dismissing the constant engagement that New Zealand has with our Pacific neighbours. Just recently, both myself and the Minister of Foreign Affairs met with the Tongan Prime Minister. The Prime Minister of Tuvalu was recently due to engage. The Prime Minister of Fiji we have visited very recently as well. Many of the nations we engage with are only just opening up in order to enable that engagement, but we have been there through COVID and we are entering in now that COVID allows.
But, you know, a lot of the nations are now open, so why not get down there
and
have
those
face-to-face meetings, which are
happy
so
to provide you the details on where we are, and where we're scheduled to be. I do not for a moment believe that New Zealand has lacked for engagement with the Pacific region through this critical time. And in fact, if you look to those that the Pacific have turned to work with in partnership through COVID, it has been New Zealand.
Sorry to drill down on this. Can you just go through me again? When you talked to Mitt Romney, what did you discuss around gun control? How did that discussion go?
Well, look, I'm always cautious to talk about in general terms because it's not for me to get into the detail of conversations. If individuals choose to speak to their own content, then they can. But I was absolutely consistent with every person that I met with today in sharing New Zealand's experience and our perspective that change is possible. We experienced a horrific event through the terrorist attack in Christchurch, and the New Zealand public supported reform, and that is what we did.
Prime Minister, before today, had you had much to do with the Friends of New Zealand caucus?
It's not necessarily traditional that we would until the opportunity to engage, but our ambassador and our representatives in Washington absolutely have that engagement.
And what's your understanding of what they do?
Oh, well, look, the same as what they do in New Zealand. So whenever we have a Friends of group in New Zealand for any particular country, we take an interest in any legislation that might be relevant. So the Kiwi Act, for instance, I know those in Washington, who are members of the Friendship Group, have been advocates for that legislation, helped championing it through its legislative process, which does bring benefit to New Zealand.
And there's a skilled migrant sort of one, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. So those kinds of issues, they serve as advocates in the different forums, be they on different committees. Often they'll have a connection or possibly a tie to New Zealand in some form, and you see that shine through as well.
Just looking ahead to your speech at Harvard tomorrow, what are some of the main points that you're looking to cover, and what are you wanting to achieve?
Don't you want to know if she's finished it yet?
I did a quick read through again yesterday evening. What stood out to me was actually the number of representatives today who raised the speech with me. Now that may well have been because they had connections themselves to Harvard, I'm not sure, but it certainly didn't lessen my sense of the magnitude of the event.
Can you give us a little preview?
No.
Are you going to pivot?
Well, otherwise you might not come and you might not listen.
So you're feeling pressure?
I think... Oh, yes. Yes, I am.
Given the conversation has pivoted very much so to gun law reform, are you going to make any edits to that speech to discuss that issue?
It's again trying to draw out the topic. I think I'll maybe let you ask the question maybe after the fact. To be fair, yes, our experience with gun legislation, our experience with the Christchurch call was on the agenda. But equally so are a number of other issues.
Quickly on
all right,
PIF,
I'll let you finish then, Jane.
Quickly on PIF, given the significance of this forum this year to sort everything out, is it a worry that it might not happen, that the people that need to be there won't be there, and it becomes...
No, I don't hold that concern. I think one of the issues has been so much effort has gone into making sure that it's at a time that people are able to attend. That in part has contributed to some of the delay, but there is such an eagerness to make sure that as many of us as possible are able to be there face to face.
So just one really quick one. We've heard a lot of very interesting, long-winded connections to New Zealand come out today. I guess it surprised you how many people seem to have some drawn-out connection.
That is actually one of the things that I enjoyed. And I won't name names, but probably my favourite today was one of the representatives who raised that they were aware of the Hundavasa toilets in Kawakawa because their wife was a relative of Hundavasa. Now, when someone has such an experience or at least knowledge of New Zealand that they can name a notable bathroom, I thought that was fantastic.